Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference channel. We are bringing the VRIC to you each and every week with our series of expert online panels. We have another great one lined up for you this week. We've got JP Cortez and Stefan Gleason of the Sound Money Defense League. We're going to discuss their thoughts on the price action of both gold and silver and learn how they are trying to restore precious metals as sound money in the United States, a very exciting project. Gentlemen, it's an honor to have you both on the show.
Great to be here.
Jesse,
Thanks,
thanks
Jesse.
for having us.
Yeah, awesome to have you both on. I do want to get started before we dive into what you're doing at the Sound Money Defense League, just to get your thoughts on the price action in gold and silver. Obviously, a lot of people excited as prices of gold has reached all-time highs so far this year. Silver seeming to try and break out. We're around the 26 and change level as we speak. Gold sitting around 2,300 right now. What do you think are the main catalysts driving both metals? And how do you see the price action moving forward? Are we in the early stages of a precious metals bull market? Do you think this is the top? I'd love to get your thoughts. And Stefan, I'll start
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah, I would say that, well, what's driving it is central bank gold buying over the last couple of years. I think a lot of this began with the most recent draconian actions of the United States to try to kick Russia out of the SWIFT system, or actually, we did kick them out of the SWIFT system, and really sent a message to the rest of the world that we are willing to weaponize the US dollar in a way that we had never done, even during the Cold War, when we were supposedly very much at odds with the Soviet Union. So I think that sent a message and caused a really big boom in central bank gold buying that's continued. And then in early March, we had, of course, gold was floating around, I guess, 2,100, looking at that high level, the previous peak from December. And then Yellen was down in Argentina talking about how we're going to also seize Russian bonds, I should say, U.S. treasuries that Russia holds. And that just kicked off another wave of buying. And so I think a lot of this is actually happening with demand outside of the country, not necessarily U.S. demand, certainly not U.S. retail demand, because we have transparency into that as one of the largest online dealers at Money Metals. And so I would say that this is being driven by central bank buying, foreign buying, especially in Asia. There's a lot of gold flowing to the east, going through Switzerland, being melted into kilo bars and moving to the east. And that's been a trend the last few years, but I think that's been accelerating. More recently, here in the last month or so, we've been starting to see more retail buying coming back into the market. And that may be because of all the headlines with the breakout above 2,100 all the way up to 2,400. So we have seen a little bit more demand come in. But really, in the last 6 months in the US, it's been selling. It's been retail, at the retail level anyway. It's been people selling their gold, particularly their gold, back, and not necessarily buying new positions. And again, that's sort of changed in the last few weeks. But we've seen a lot of retail selling, people taking money off the table, seeing gold at all-time highs. Maybe they were frustrated. Maybe they want to, take some profits. So I think that's an interesting dichotomy between U.S. retail, certainly, and then global flows in general. Obviously, the higher prices indicates, in general, more demand, but it isn't necessarily coming from the U.S., and it's definitely not coming from U.S. retail. So in terms of what happens from here, I kind of think that we may have reached the peak here for the early part of the year. There's typically a seasonal high in the spring. Obviously, it doesn't always follow that pattern, but I think given the recent reach up to 2,400 and 29 or $30 on silver, that we might be seeing a little bit of a correction here for the rest of the spring and summer. But in terms of long term, that gold breakout in particular over 2,100 was very, very significant. And I don't necessarily see us dropping back below that level at this point. I think it's just a matter of when we take the next leg up. As far as silver goes, it's a little bit more difficult. Silver is still well below its 2011 high. It's well below its 1980 high, which is really about $180 in inflation adjusted dollars. So we're way down in silver still. It's going to take a lot more time. But again, silver tends to follow gold. That's a typical trend. And so I think as gold continues higher, silver is going to break above 30 and then make a run at 50. But I don't see that happening until at least the fall at this point.
And
But that would
JP,
be big.
Yeah, JP, do you see the same catalysts? Anything else you'd like to add? And I'm wondering what your perspective is on geopolitical risk when it comes to what drives the gold market. Because I was speaking to someone about in the gold space, actually another gold dealer the other day, and they were saying they think one of the main drivers for the gold price has also been the geopolitical uncertainty and global conflict. How much of that plays a role in the gold price? And is that kind of more of a short-term driver, or can it have long-term implications?
Well, I think Stefan hit the nail on the head when he mentioned international banks, central banks buying gold all around the world. And I think, primarily the reason for that is because of all of this uncertainty that exists, right? Between the uncertainty happening here in the United States and central bank manipulations, the dollar obviously dying. Around the world, you have competitors, active competitors to the dollar, countries that are actively trying to create systems to combat the dollar. And notably, those systems are supposedly going to be ideally backed by gold. I'm speaking to that Zimbabwe currency recently. And to be sure, the Zimbabwe government and no other government in the world has given me confidence to believe that they can instill and actually produce a gold-backed currency. That requires fiscal discipline in a way that internationally we have not seen. But I think that there are primary competitors now to the dollar. There are the potential for war in a way that feels a little closer than it has been in recent years. And all of this, I think, is largely a result of moving away from sound money, right? This war thing in particular, America is very willing to spill treasure and blood to fight wars of choice in many cases. And now we're seeing several of those pop up on multiple fronts around the world. And yeah, understandably, I think when the U.S. is weaponizing assets from other countries and claiming them as their own, it makes a lot of sense to me that those other countries would say, hey, wait, hang on. Why are we all using the dollar? There has to be something more decentralized, something that doesn't require the trust and good faith of an authority. And so I think for that reason and several other reasons, gold is seeing a readoption. It's a revolution in money that we're actively seeing, not just with the uptick in price, though that is telling. I think we're seeing it. I mean, for my money, we're seeing it on the state legislature side too, where states themselves are trying to protect and bolster their state funds, their taxpayer funds with physical gold and silver in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. So I think there's a revolution happening now in money, and the dollar is losing its shine, and people are starting to move or at least consider alternatives. And gold and silver, obviously being constitutional money, being money for thousands of years, naturally it makes sense that that would be a Schelling point, that people would naturally sort of come back to gold and silver as money.
Very well said. I do want to circle back to what you were saying, Stefan, about retail participation in the gold market in the West, because I've heard similar sentiments to what you mentioned from other precious metals dealers when it comes to the buying of physical gold. We also saw outflows from gold ETFs in the West. And apparently most retail demand now is coming from the East, places like China, places like India. Is that what you're seeing? And do you think more people in the West will eventually kind of, as JP was saying, wake up to gold and silver's
Yeah,
value as either sound money or just a way to protect their wealth from all the madness that's going on without a
yeah.
control, government debt, and things like that? Could that be a major catalyst moving forward?
Yeah, well, it's kind of relative because over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a huge increase in demand in general in the US retail. I mean, it started with COVID-19 and martial law and attack on Ukraine and inflation concerns. So the bank run the bank issue last year, that was really the last kind of major thrust of demand that we saw in our retail market. It kind of ended around the summer, and it's been relatively quiet in the retail market, at least compared to the 2 to 3 years before that. But I should point out that it is a higher level of demand than we saw 5 years ago, and that's because of all the factors we've been discussing. So I think that it's just maybe there's a moment. There's been a lot of retail buying. There's the existing people bought a lot Some of them are selling because of the higher prices. Meanwhile, you see the headlines in the US, Bank of America, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, they're all predicting much higher gold prices. You're starting to see a little more mainstream discussion about the role of gold and and all the news around the highs. So we are seeing new people come in. You know, there's a lot of been a news around Costco selling gold bars, which isn't really the best place to buy gold bars from a price standpoint, but it's really great from the standpoint of introducing this product to the general public when they may not have thought about it before. And then as they become more savvy, they'll go and find an online dealer or someone else who's, you know, makes a better market and has better pricing. But the bottom line is all this stuff is good. We're seeing more interest. So I don't want to suggest that there isn't demand. There clearly is. It's just been a lot less than you would think given the higher prices. But the retail market really is often kind of contradicting what's happening in general. And I do see a significant increase coming because even today, it's still 1 to maybe 2% of people have any gold or silver whatsoever. So that goes to 3 or 4. That's a double. That's huge. That's a huge amount of demand in at the retail level. And frankly, it would be very difficult. We've already seen this in the past. Be very difficult for the fabricated, you know, minting and silver rounds and silver bars and gold bars to get that product out there in the market. You'll see premiums rise again like they have and, you know, had been in the last 2 or 3 years. So I think we're just having a little bit of a breather, a little more selling, a little more equilibrium between the buying and the selling at the retail level. But that's just short term. This is definitely a trend, and for all the reasons we've discussed, U.S. is going to participate in a big way. It's just not really leading right now, certainly at the retail level.
And I think it is interesting, right? When you consider the difference between the West and the East there and retail participation, I think is much different. And I think having spent some time in Asia, you can see the difference in Asian countries. For example, the role that gold plays is not simply an investment or a pet rock or a barbarous relic, right? This is a cultural asset to these people in many cases. This is a religious asset. This means so much more. So whereas here in the United States, the people who primarily invest in gold tend to be older, the younger people are not generally the demographic of people who buy gold and silver. So, and that's a very different thing in Asian countries, in Japan and Thailand and Singapore. Whereas here, like I mentioned, the demographic tends to be higher. But I think one of the cool things that we're seeing as a result of currency debasement, people are starting to look for alternatives, right? So you're on this sinking ship and there are only so many lifeboats. And so you're starting to look around for lifeboats. And gold and silver, I think, are an obvious lifeboat and one that people are like Stefan was saying, obviously starting to adopt, right? And it's part of it is a function of this point in time, or the central banking, the currency manipulation. Part of it is that. I think another really interesting part of it is the innovation that we've had in this space, right? So the Sound Money Defense League, what we do on a very macro level is to this space, this industry that is money. We're trying to remove all the briar and the thistles and all the brush around people being able to use and save and spend their gold and silver, but also that breeds the innovation in the space. The removal of regulations and disincentives are what get creative people to commit time and money and brain power to creating systems that can't be inflated away, that can't be manipulated, that can't be weaponized to hurt their enemies and to help their friends. So doing that, removing some of the regulation around this stuff is, I think, bringing gold and silver to the modern age. So we're seeing fractional gold, we're seeing digital gold, we're seeing all of these innovations in gold. And I think that is something that could be a catalyst to waking up this younger demographic to investing in gold and silver, to using it as money, and to having it be the North Star to sound money and to understanding why a stable sound money is important.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good segue into the Sound Money Defense League and your efforts at influencing legislature. getting laws changed around precious metals to make it less restrictive for people to purchase and own them, along with several other initiatives. So maybe JP, I'll start with you on this one. If you could give us an overview of the Sound Money Defense League, what it is you do, and then I'll throw it to Stefan to maybe give us a recap of what's been accomplished so far and plans for the future.
I'm the executive director of the Sound Money Defense League. We're a national nonpartisan sound money advocacy group. We work primarily to remonetize gold and silver as America's constitutional money, right? The U.S. Constitution says that gold and silver are money. It's the only form of money mentioned in the Constitution. And currently, there are a lot of shackles and disincentives standing in the way of people being able to use gold and silver as money. That is it. Primarily, that's in the form of taxes. In some states, in some cases here in the United States, you're hit with triple taxation when you try to buy and sell and use gold and silver as money. You'll be charged with a sales tax when you buy the metal. If you sell the metal and enjoy a gain, you would be charged with the feds will charge you a capital gain, and then the state will charge you another capital gain. So the levels of taxation here are broad. And so we have gone for, since 2015, the Sound Money Defense League has been around. So coming up on 10 years now, have gone state to state, removing all of the taxes that introduce friction into using gold and silver as money, right? Because today, to use gold and silver as money means to track your cost basis. And every time you go to the grocery store, you have to, if I'm buying $100 worth of grocery stores and I'm going to use 3 or 4 silver eagles, what date did I buy those eagles at? How much was the price then? This is and so it's unworkable as money. There's just too much friction involved. So to removing those taxes or in our opinion, the biggest impediment standing in the way to people using gold and silver as money and to readopting their own gold standard. So we're going state to state, removing a lot of the taxes, but it's not just taxes either. We're also empowering state treasurers to invest physical gold and silver in their state funds, their pension funds held within the state or in a contiguous state. This is legislation that would establish in-state depositories, that would issue gold bonds, that would declare that CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, are not money in their state. So this it's a very robust project, the legislative project we have, and that you can find more information if you wanted to. We have an index that we print every year that grades all 50 states using 14 different indicators that we use to determine which state has the best and the worst sound money environment in the country. And so I'll let Stefan pick it up, but over the last 9 years now, it's been an incredible success, honestly, with bank runs and inflation and these very basic questions about money being more of dinner table conversations, questions about, wait, why do we use money? Where does it come from? Where does it derive its value? Those are questions people are starting to ask in a very real way. And to that end, individuals and states themselves are readily introducing and readily passing sound money legislation.
What's up, guys? Quick break. My name is Jay Martin. I'm the CEO of Cambridge House and the host of the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. I wanted to quickly point your attention to a link right beneath this video where you can subscribe to our new weekly newsletter. If you want to better understand the minds of the best investors in the resource space, subscribe to this newsletter. I author it personally every Sunday and I love writing it. Hit that link below to subscribe. All right, back to the interview.
Yeah, very interesting. And especially the point about people waking up to what is money. My own awakening moment happened during the pandemic. So actually, I'm pretty new to all of this. When I got laid off of my job and I started to kind of try to figure out all these laws the government was passing to just hand out free money to people, I thought, this is weird. I got laid off of my job because there wasn't enough customers and the government's writing me these checks and then, oh, here's a bonus on top of that. Here's an extra $1,000. Here you go. I'm like, wait a minute. How is this all working? I dove into Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money documentary. I got hooked from there into learning about it. But Stefan, why don't you kind of recap the biggest wins that you see for the Sound Money Defense League so far and what your plans are for the future? I'm also interested in hearing about what the top few jurisdictions are on your Sound Money Index.
Sure. And JP, maybe you can pull that up to go over the list while we're talking. But The actual successes have been snowballing, honestly. We started this, as JP mentioned, in 2015. I have a public policy background. Before I launched Money Metals and was in business, I was in public policy, and I learned grassroots politics and how to mobilize and organize and pass legislation and use the power of the people to get things done. And we've been able to make that happen at the state level, really because at the state level, they're not used to seeing the organization. They're not used to seeing the contact from the grassroots the same way that happens federally. And not to say that you can't influence things federally with grassroots. That's still a powerful tool. But at the state level, with our know-how and frankly, with our large list of Money Metals customers, we have 500,000 customers. We have a couple million email addresses, and we know how to use these lists to give people things to do at key times that allow them to weigh in to their legislator and pressure their legislator, call and email, and even come and testify and talk about the bills that we're pushing. And that has really been what's carried the day in a lot of these battles. And so as we've kind of sharpened our skills and our program, and as legislators have seen these bills passing, we're seeing more momentum. So just in the last few years, we have primarily and initially we focused on removing the sales tax, because at the time we started, there might have been maybe 16 states that were taxing the purchase of gold and silver. It's now down to 5. We've passed 2 more sales tax exemptions this year alone. We may even have 1 or 2 more. There's only 5 left that fully tax all purchases. We passed Kentucky and Wisconsin earlier this year. Last year on the sales tax front, we had Tennessee, last 2 years, we had Virginia, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Ohio, and West Virginia. And so we're starting with kind of the low-hanging fruit. The most obvious thing is, why would somebody be forced to pay tax on exchanging Federal Reserve notes for constitutional money? It makes no sense. There's lots of business development reasons and so forth. It's very meaningful, especially with bullion, where these margins are so small. If you hit somebody with a 9% tax, that's more than the margin, that's more than the dealer profit. It's totally uneconomic, and people are leaving the state to go buy gold somewhere else. The businesses in a state are suffering. And we've gotten to the point where all of the sales tax states are surrounded by tax exempt states. And so it's really kind of snowballing. We're down to 5. Then we're moving to the income tax, which is a little less of a, it's a broader field of opportunity, I guess is a good way of putting it. We passed Nebraska just last week, removing the capital gains tax at the state level. Last year, we got Arkansas as well, after having passed sales tax a couple years earlier. Arizona has already done this. Utah has already done this. And then now we're moving to gold reserves as well. So states are embracing the idea of holding gold as a reserve asset to hedge against their bonds and their debt paper exposure, which is very significant in most of these states. It seems to be all they have, so that they've got $10 billion or $20 billion in reserves, and it's held in corporate bonds and CDs and treasury notes with a 2% return or a 3% return at most, which of course is a negative return in inflation terms. So you literally have these states are just dumping money down the drain in real terms. And so they're looking at adding gold. And Utah just did this in the last couple months. They passed a law last year. Tennessee passed a law. The Idaho governor vetoed a law because he's a globalist, and thinks paper money is a modern innovation, that should be defended for some reason. But so we're having successes, we're having setbacks, but we really haven't been losing any of the laws we've been passing. It's really just a matter of how many we can pass. There's not much organized opposition, or really there is no organized opposition. There may be an education gap with these politicians, or they're just inherently statist, or it's just difficult to pass legislation. There's thousands of bills introduced in most states every year, and not that many pass. Way too many, frankly, pass. But it's not easy to pass a law, and it really takes a lot of organization. So that's what we're focused on. JP, do you want to mention the states, the top 5, and maybe the bottom 5 states on sound money?
Yeah, so the top 5 right now, as it stands in the most recent edition of the Sound Money Index, are Wyoming, South Dakota, Alaska, New Hampshire, and Arkansas. Arkansas is a recent addition to the top 5 after having recently passed legislation to reaffirm gold and silver as legal tender. They eliminated capital gains on their gold and silver. They enforced constitutional protections for contracts denominated in gold and silver. So they recently passed a pretty robust sound money law in Arkansas. Wyoming was actually our first real sound money win back in 2017 or 2018. And that was the first sound money bill, I think. So there was, or rather for the Sound Money Defense League anyway, the first bill that we worked very closely with legislators there and helped author the bill and ultimately got that passed to remove all tax liability on the metals. They already did not have a capital gains tax. They don't have a state income tax, but the law was written so as to preclude any future tax liability that may arise. And then South Dakota, Alaska, New Hampshire are states with just generally good tax policies. They don't tax the purchase of metals. In many cases, they don't have a state income tax. So these are all states that have, in many cases, proactively passed legislation. In Alaska's case, there's active legislation there right now. I think I'll be on a plane to Alaska here in the next couple of days for a hearing. For the last year or so, we've been working with legislators out there. Because Alaska doesn't have a state sales tax, but they do empower their municipalities and localities to charge a sales tax. And so we have gone in, the state is going in and saying that no locality may charge a sales tax on the purchase of constitutional sound money either. It also would call for a study for the state of Alaska to consider alternative currencies and to study how they might further incorporate gold and silver to their holdings, their assets. So in Alaska, they're considering legislation there as well. On the back end, the worst states here on this issue, the bottom 5 are California, not surprising, Minnesota, Maine, New Jersey, and Vermont. One of the interesting things I think about this chart is that of these 5 states, 3 of them are states that there are 3 of the remaining 5 states are in this bottom 5 that do not charge a sales tax on precious metals. But Maine, New Jersey, and Vermont, those 3, all actively have legislation right now to end the tax. So of the remaining few states that still charge this sales tax, even the few stragglers are really getting behind this movement and starting to introduce and in some cases pass legislation as well. In New Jersey's case, we passed legislation earlier this year that New Jersey, for those who may not know, is not exactly a haven for people looking to avoid taxes. New Jersey is one of the highest tax rates in the country. But yet still, we introduced legislation in New Jersey to end the sales tax on the purchase of gold and silver, and it received not a single no vote through any of the votes that it had. It got unanimous approval through several committees and then through the entire Senate and through the entire state assembly. So hundreds of votes and not a single no vote. And unfortunately, the bill reached Governor Murphy in New Jersey and he vetoed it. He didn't give a reason. But we are now actively in the process. Within 10 days of that veto, we had legislation reintroduced to do the same thing, an identical bill. And now we are 2 votes away. We're in the House now. We've already passed out of the Senate. We're 2 votes away from getting this back to the governor's desk, where hopefully he'll sign it this time. So even the states that are at the bottom of this list are making strides in passing sound money. And I think that kind of gives us resolve. We've seen it's been incredible to go from a project where we were going out and trying to find sponsors and solicit sponsors. Hey, we have this idea. Would you consider carrying this bill this year? And having to fight tooth and nail to get these bills introduced. Whereas now that's not the case anymore. We have legislators reaching out to us telling us, hey, we've introduced your bill and now we'd like your help. Or, hey, we found that we saw a bill that passed a couple years ago in this state and we took it and introduced it as our own. Would you come help us? And it's so exciting to see the snowball effect that this is having. So it's not a niche thing anymore. It's not right wing or deeply red states that are doing this. This is a nonpartisan issue because everyone is affected and harmed by the ravages of inflation.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's also
absolutely.
a winning issue politically, I think, so because they're seeing the
Yeah.
grassroots. So it's a combination of seeing the successes and politicians are followers, first of all. They're not leaders, they're followers. And so they see everyone else doing it, and then they start getting more comfortable doing these things. And so I think it's been the snowball effect of laws passing. It's been the situations where they experience the grassroots involvement, and they're not seeing any kind of organized opposition, but they're seeing a lot of people that care about this in their districts. And that's because of, primarily, well, part of it is because people are just coming out of the woodwork, and part of it is because we at Money Metals are using our lists and getting people engaged. And so it's turning into like a winning issue. And so now JP is dealing with 40 bills coming in every session now the last couple of years, half of which we were behind, half of which just happened organically because of this. And it's a very different thing than 10 years ago, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, incredible efforts. I think more light needs to be shined on what the Sound Money Defense League is doing, because it's fantastic. I do want to talk about how ultimately perhaps gold and silver could be used in a transactional way, because obviously at the moment there's not many places, if any, that you can just walk into with a silver eagle and purchase groceries or something like that. You could correct me if I'm wrong, but we are seeing several different projects trying to encourage people to transact with gold and silver. We've got the gold backs, which are these bills that contain a very small amount of gold in them. Those face their own issues as the gold price fluctuates. Again, I've also heard that not a lot of places want to take those. And I've also heard that there's some issues over time. The bills themselves can degrade a little bit. There's digital products that offer vaulted gold and silver, and that can be connected to a credit card or a debit card sort of system, allowing you to technically spend precious metals as money. There's some other digital online platforms and apps as well. How do you see gold and silver being eventually used in a transactional way? Is it through one of these methods I've described? Will there come a day when you can actually walk into a store and give them a silver coin? I'll start with you, Stefan, on this one.
Well, I think that there are a couple impediments. First of all, is that the friction around the taxes. And so I think that's why we're focused on removing that friction so that gold can function in the free market without these impediments. It can be kind of an equal type of money that doesn't have the US Federal Reserve note does not have taxes. You don't get to deduct your capital losses when they devalue it, for example. It's a non-entity from a tax standpoint. And so removing the taxes from gold and silver, we think, is the most practical way to remonetize. I think the other problem that prevents gold from functioning as money is that right now it's more of it's savings. It's Gresham's law, really, is sort of, you take a step back. It's really Gresham's law, which is that the bad money in circulation forces the good money out. And so the good money, which is gold and silver, goes into private hoards and becomes savings. And we use the bad money because it's, for one, the system is wired for the bad money, but second, it's still accepted. And I'm not going to spend my gold personally until I'm forced to. I would much rather spend Federal Reserve notes. It's more convenient. That's part of it. But it's also that I don't want to spend my gold. That's selling your gold. So, if you need the cash for something, then that's fine, and you can do that. But I think that's part of the problem in these ideas taking hold. Part of it's the friction around the taxes. Part of it is the business case that right now it's more sort of a savings and not something that people want to spend. So I think it's important, these projects that make it more easy or less difficult to transact in gold. But I think until we get to a point where people need to do so, or they're offered a discount, for example, for using gold instead of the Federal Reserve note, I don't think we're going to see wide adoption of gold and silver as a transactional currency. But that doesn't mean that it's not something that's growing in popularity and that people are not hoarding and saving. On the gold back, I think I like the gold back, not because it's something that I want to spend, but it's, again, reaching people in a new way. And I think, in the West, we've been programmed that money is this paper thing. And this is, 20 years ago when I first got interested, I started thinking, what is this Federal Reserve note? why does this have value? How do interest rates go? What is the Fed doing? Why are they doing all this, alchemy and turning dials and changing interest rates and basically fixing the price of money? And so people are thinking, okay, this is money. It's this paper thing. So the gold back kind of comes back, and people go, oh my gosh, it's like, it feels like money. It goes in my wallet like money, but it actually is money because it's worth actually what it's made of, and so I think I like it from the standpoint of just evangelizing about sound money. So it's reaching people psychologically. I think that has value. In terms of practice, it has a very high premium. It's not cheap. One gold back basically costs about twice the amount of gold in it. And that's not really a criticism of the gold back, because if you think about the technology to take 1/1000th of an ounce and put it into something like that, because otherwise it'd be like a gold coin that gets stuck in the lint of your pocket. You couldn't use it, but they've created a technology to allow it to be used that way. But it's not something to put a lot of money in because of the premium. And ultimately people should try to look at the price of how much they're paying versus the price of gold, and prioritize things that have low premiums, at least for their big money or their real money. But having a few gold backs, absolutely fine. I support the idea, and I really like it for the messaging standpoint. But I don't see that becoming the money, except in a crisis, ultimately. And that could come, and we do need to be ready. But that isn't here today, and that's why I think a lot of these projects are not really taking off like crazy, even though they're important.
Right. And JP, we are seeing a lot of the reason people stacking things like constitutional silver, aka junk silver, stuff like that, is for that doomsday scenario. The entire economy collapses. We now need to go back to a barter system, at least for a time being. Gold, obviously, too large of a denomination to do that. Whereas with smaller allocations of silver, you could barter or trade. Do you think that's a reason to own silver or even gold? And kind of expand on what Stefan was saying. Do you also not really see gold and silver outside of that scenario being used as a transactional currency anytime soon?
I think holding gold and silver as an asset to use as money in the case of financial collapse and needing to use small pieces to barter. Yeah, I think that's a great idea to do. I think that the risk of that is non-zero. I think, like Stefan was saying, we're not there yet. And the power to control money is a great and awesome power. And the people who currently hold it are going to fight tooth and nail to keep their monopoly on money. So I think the idea that tomorrow one of these gold companies is going to displace the dollar, I think is probably not necessarily the case. But like Stefan, I think all of these innovations in money are important, and that's why we do what we do, so that people can use gold and silver and innovate in gold and silver to create the infrastructure and the products to be able to use it as money when the time comes to do that. I think Stefan's point about Gresham's law is probably, from an economic sense, probably the most powerful one. I know when people, it doesn't make sense to me to spend my gold or my silver today. I think another point to hit on, at least the digital stuff, I think the people that buy gold and silver are the people who lose all of their gold and silver in a boating accident. So this system that's tokenized, and you've got every transaction digitized onto a blockchain or whatever it is. I think that kind of runs afoul of the ethos of many gold and silver holders and savers. I think that highlights the importance of things like cash in the society that we have today, where you have the ability to do permissionless peer-to-peer exchange. I think, yeah, part of the ethos or the mantra of those who support sound money tend to be freedom lovers, liberty lovers, people skeptical of a government that could otherwise track or impose certain things. So for that reason, I have concerns about the adoption of some of the digital projects, because I think you're going to run into that natural friction there of people who don't want to be digital by design. But other than that, I think, the reason that this is important is because ultimately none of us decide, right? So the beauty of a marketplace system is that all of these smart people, or in some cases not smart people, can come together and their ideas can battle it out, and the system, the interface that best suits and serves the needs of its users will ultimately win. And so we want a free market in money. That's what we're calling for when we're advocating for gold and silver. So I personally don't necessarily want to back a single company or a single asset like that. I personally feel comfortable letting the market decide, and the market will win out. And the company that best provides value to its users, being in privacy, being in fractionability, being in the ability to transact or clear transactions fast or quicker than the system that currently exists. All of those things I think will factor into which of these systems ultimately gets adopted. And I'm rooting for the best one, not any single one, but the one that provides the most value to the people with concern that their money is currently being weaponized.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, that's a really good point about the friction between the tech platforms and the typical precious metals owner, at least in the US. People want to have physical possession of their gold and silver. At Money Metals, about 98% of what we sell is being shipped out to people so they can have it in their personal possession. That's why they're buying gold and silvers. They don't want any counterparty risk. They want to have the money. They want to store it away safely. And whether they should have that much in their house is another question. There's a point where you go into depositories like Money Metals Depository, and we do have many storage customers, but the vast majority of people are buying gold and silver as financial insurance to get it out of the hands of the banks, of tech people. They want to know they have their money and they want to have possession of it. And so there is a little bit of a friction there, but these other things have a place, and in certain use cases make a lot of sense. But it's interesting. JP's point is, I think, a fundamental point, which is why these platforms, as of yet, haven't really taken off, combined with some of the other factors we discussed, like taxes.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, it's been a fantastic conversation. I learned a ton chatting today. I will go ahead and put a link in the description below to both the Sound Money Defense League as well as Money Metals for people who do want to learn more. Thank you for all you're doing for Sound Money and its adoption in the United States. And I wish you the best of success with the project.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Jesse. If you don't mind, I'd just a shout out to any listeners that are still listening. I encourage you to check out soundmoneydefense.org. If you're in the United States, we're actively fighting legislative projects all over the country. And like Stefan said, ultimately what makes a difference is the grassroots. So if you have an interest in these projects, I encourage you to go to our website, sign up for our mailing list. In the case of a legislative battle or a key vote in your zip code, you will receive an email alerting you to the latest happenings and telling you how you can take action to support and to ultimately pass Sound Money. So yeah, please check us out.